Brings us to the front bench spokesman, Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm very pleased to participate in this debate, and I thank the Honourable Member for Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport for his comprehensive setting out of the issue before us today about the use of bee-killing pesticides in our agriculture. And this matters very much to my constituents in North Ayrshire and Arran, and I know it matters to constituents right across the UK because we all receive correspondence on this in pretty large numbers. And the reason for the concern about this issue is that bees are such a crucial part of our ecosystem, and we must do all we can to protect them from the detrimental impacts of environmental alterations and climate change. The International Union for Conservation of Nature list shows that as many as 24% of Europe's bumblebee species are now threatened with extinction, despite being worth a staggering, for the UK, a staggering £690 million per year to the UK economy. Bees are vital to our agriculture. Out of every 3 mouthfuls of food we eat exists because of pollination. Bees pollinate an array of crops, including apples, peas, courgettes, pumpkins, tomatoes, strawberries and raspberries. And if we lose bees and other pollinators, growing many types of food would be extremely challenging. Our diets would suffer tremendously. The variety of foods available would diminish and the cost of certain products would surge. In fact, many argue that pollination provides one of the clearest examples of how our disregard for the health of the environment threatens our very survival. Since 1900, the UK has lost 13 species of bee, and a further 35 are considered to be under threat of extinction. Not least, as we're talking about today, not least because of toxic pesticides and climate change. No species of bees are protected by law. The contribution of honeybees to nature and food product is significant. We've heard today from a number of members that up to 3/4 of crop species are pollinated by bees and other pollinators. So bees are the ultimate symbol, perhaps, of a healthy environment, and in terms of our climate, our food security and our natural world. Bees could not be a more important factor in these areas. But, Madam Chair, this really is, when you look again at what's happening in Scotland and what's happening in England, it is again a tale of two governments. The Scottish Government launched a strategy to make Scotland a more pollinator-friendly and sustainable place by protecting indigenous bee and butterfly populations via its Pollinator Strategy for Scotland 2017 to 2027 work. This sets out how to make Scotland a place where pollinators can thrive and how these objectives can be achieved, and importantly, raising public awareness as to the value of Scotland's pollinating insects and the regulation of non-native species. But while this is going on, we have a UK government which, and from all we've heard today, shows that there's no real sense of urgency about this important matter. The member for Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport pointed out the UK government has retained the pesticide along with other neonicotinoids banned in the EU in 2013. This has been retained in the UK using the EU temporary emergency exemption. Measures in the EU to protect pollinators are in place, including bees, but we saw the UK opting out. And I echo the honourable gentleman who's no longer in his place about the impact of glyphosate, as well as the need to address that issue as well. For the third year in a row, the continued use of thiamexotham, I hope I've pronounced that properly, has been authorised by this government. The European Court, of course, has ruled against its emergency use as it's known to be lethal to bees, wasps and other pollinators. And not just for the danger it poses to wild bee colonies, but also to humans, since it's linked to a wide range of other health challenges. But it wasn't so long ago that the former DEFRA Minister, the Honourable Member for Surrey Heath, declared, and I quote, "We cannot afford to put our pollinator populations at risk." And yet, here we are. Several members today have reminded us that with 1 teaspoon of pesticide, That is enough to kill 1.25 million bees. So the sensible way forward in the face of the facts that we've heard today is surely a total ban on bee-killing pesticides. Many encouraged, and include members of my own party in this, the SNP, many encouraged the UK Government to make the Environment Act of 2021 stronger by following Scotland's example in areas such as air pollution, outlawing harmful pesticides and independent oversight of environmental protection. But this, sadly, has been to no avail. The reality is that legal requirements set out in the Environment Act in 2021 to halt species decline by 2030 will be as written on water if the UK Government doesn't step up and protect England's natural environment and preserve biodiversity. And of course this matters very much in Scotland, even though it's a matter for the UK Government, because bees don't recognise borders. So bees across the UK are potentially harmed by what is going on across the rest of the UK. And it's also very important this government prioritises, if I can just finish this point and I'll come to the Honourable Lady, it's also very important that the government prioritises the environment and protects farmers in international deals, because improving trade is one thing, but our natural environment must not be jeopardised with poisonous chemicals that result in the death of invaluable pollinators. There must be no regression on environmental standards and protections, and I urge the Minister to follow the direction and example of the Scottish Government and that of the EU in banning pesticides and protect pollinators. Now, during the Brexit debate, many of us warned of a divergence in standards between the UK and the EU over time, leading, of course, as everybody feared, to the lowering of standards in the UK over a whole range of areas. And we were told that that wouldn't happen, this was nonsense, and it would liberate the UK to make even greater progress. But today what we're hearing is very much what our fears were coming true when it comes to protecting bees and what's happening. Absolutely, and local initiatives like this, of course, must be applauded, they must be supported. But what we really need is a lead from the UK Government about the level of pesticides, about the use of pesticides, and about putting our bees, and the very important that work bees do on our behalf, which probably many of us take for granted. But of course, it brings me beautifully on to my next point, because although many of us might take the work that bees do, we might take it for granted, but we have to remember the impact they have on the production of our crops. Because what we don't want to do is to find ourselves at some future point to be in the same position as some fruit farmers in China, where wild bees have been eradicated by excessive pesticide use and the lack of natural habitats. And this has forced farmers to hand pollinate their trees, carrying pots and paintbrushes, individually pollinating every flower. It's simply not possible to pollinate every crop that we want by hand, but it shows you the kind of position, the kind of nightmare scenario that you could end up in, and the impact that will have on the food, the very food that we eat, and our survival. This is an issue which becomes more pressing every passing day as our bees continue to diminish. And I hope when the Minister gets on his feet that he will agree that it is indeed time for his government to get busy and start saving bees and ban neonicotinoid pesticides before it's too late. The government, as he's heard today, his government needs to follow the science and remember bees and the government's own environment improvement plan. And if I can just end, Madam Chair, by saying that the government needs to get itself into a hive of activity and save our bees.